Was this tailored to an audience of one, President Trump?
Yeah, I think that was pretty obvious up there. But we did get a little bit more detail about the strikes over the weekend, specifically on Fordo. That was really what this entire briefing focused on from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, including information such as that 6 of these massive ordnance penetrators were actually targeted on that nuclear facility there. But Anna, the big question remains not whether this mission was successful in that it carried out, the men and women of the military carried out the mission in the way they were directed to do, but whether the U.S. actually has intelligence or evidence that the facility at Fordo and that the ones at Natanz and Isfahan were destroyed. And not just that, what was destroyed as part of those? Was there any enriched uranium? Were there centrifuges that were part of that as well? Now, we did hear from Secretary Hegseth about that, the idea that the highly enriched uranium, whether it was actually destroyed or not, or whether it was moved. But on it, he didn't really provide any actual details on it. Here's what he had to say.
Do you have certainty that all the highly enriched uranium was inside the Fordo mountain, or some of it, because there were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance? Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect. We're looking at all aspects of intelligence. I'm not aware of any intelligence that I've reviewed that says things were not where they were supposed to be, moved or otherwise.
Now, soon after the briefing was finished, Anna, we had a Truth Social from President Trump about this same issue, about the idea of whether the enriched uranium or any of these components necessary for creating a nuclear weapon were moved. The president saying the cars and small trucks at the site were those of concrete workers trying to cover up the top of the shafts. Nothing was taken out of the facility, would have taken too long, too dangerous, very heavy and hard to move. He is referring there, Anna, to there were several ventilation shafts. There was a point of vulnerability that the U.S. targeted with those bombs, the hope that the bombs would be able to penetrate further down. Well, those ventilation shafts in recent days were covered by concrete. The president, and we heard the very first first bomb actually took those out. The president, they're referring to the ventilation shafts and saying that the trucks that were there were concrete, not addressing, again, the facilities at Natanz and Isfahan where the U.S. also struck, Anna.
And so, Monica, why did they decide to hold this presser just before the classified Senate briefing?
Well, Anna, I think this is about optics and about trying to provide some additional details. And we know that there was the new assessment and statement from the CIA director, for instance, overnight that did back up a little bit more of what the president was trying to argue. And he's been relying even on the Iranian officials' statement about these nuclear sites being badly damaged. He's also been citing, of course, the Israeli assessments. But this is really about trying to issue a counter narrative from the president and his top officials to what was in that preliminary finding that upset him so much that he was very clearly lashing out about yesterday when he was holding that press conference at NATO, and that he's been talking about on social media pretty consistently since then. This is about the president trying to communicate that and trying to control that narrative, I think, in many ways, even though he himself conceded that the intelligence, even if it was in its early stages, was accurate at the time. But that was the idea, that it was preliminary and that there was going to be a lot more information coming in. But this is somebody who is very defensive about his decisions here, and specifically trying to link that to this idea that there's criticism of the military involved in the actual strikes, which is not really what people have been raising. It's the president making that linkage when really it's just key questions that are raised that even the utmost experts can't answer with any kind of certainty. And that also connects to this concept of what may have happened with the enriched uranium, whether it was moved or not. This is a president who is being completely definitive about things that, frankly, cannot be said with such certainty at this time and may take a long time to figure out, Anna.
Right. And so, Richard, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth are continuing to slam the media for doing our jobs, for reporting on, for asking questions about the intelligence around the Iran attack. Here's Senator Mark Warner, vice chair of the Intel Committee, explaining why the administration does need to be pressed on the details.
Some of this were questions that we're going to have to be asking. Listen, intelligence was manipulated, and we ended up in a war that I think most Americans wish we would have thought twice about. We already have an administration that is clearly firing people. If they don't change their intelligence, so it doesn't potentially embarrass the president. That is holy crap kind of danger.
Richard, this is post-Iraq war. This isn't lawmakers and reporters splitting hairs. It's asking the White House to show their work. Did this morning's presentation start that process?
Look, lots of things to say. Battle damage assessment is always highly subjective. I've looked at any number of photographs, and it's hard sometimes to know exactly what you're looking at. The idea that different people would have different interpretations makes perfect sense. Second of all, you can't destroy what you didn't target. So I think there are big questions about what was not necessarily located in that facility, whether it was moved out recently, or for all we know, it was placed somewhere else years ago. That's why, I think it's possible at one and the same time to say this was an impressive military action. It was warranted. At the same time, it didn't obliterate or eliminate the Iranian nuclear program. Elements of it will have survived. And I think in the years ahead, the United States and Israel may well have to deal with it. So I think the administration is probably doing itself no favors in making the absolute case of what it accomplished. Because again, I think going forward, it's unlikely that Iran will give up its nuclear program. It's unlikely that diplomacy will solve it for us. So it may be that we're called upon once again to act militarily against it.
Courtney, it does seem the White House intel view on Iran's nuclear program appears to be coalescing now. Tell us about this latest CIA assessment.
Yeah, both the CIA and the DNI now saying with certainty that they have information that the nuclear program or these nuclear facilities were destroyed. But the reality is we've been asking questions, including here today at the Pentagon, about what that's based on, and whether it's based on U.S. collection, whether it's based on allies. Secretary Hegseth, as well as President Trump yesterday, reading statements from other nations' intelligence agencies or our monitoring agencies, including the Israelis, saying that they believe that there was that there was destruction. But again, as Richard was just pointing out, nobody is showing their work here. No one is providing any details about what that's based on. We had, I keep going back to this one comment that we heard from President Trump yesterday at The Hague, where he said that people have had eyes on. We've got no information about exactly who those people were, whether it was some country's intelligence agents, which would be a pretty shocking admission by the president to make, or whether it was some sort of a monitoring body that we're not aware of. But those are the kinds of details that we don't have, is exactly if, in fact, these facilities like the one at Fordo was destroyed, then how do we know that? We have these overhead satellite images that were shown today, and there is the compelling case that was laid out by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for what the mission was and how it was executed exactly the way that it was supposed to be executed. But that doesn't provide the evidence that with the execution of it, no matter how perfectly the men and women in those aircraft actually conducted the mission, that it actually was the bombs did the job that they were supposed to do. What we saw today was video of testing where the bombs did what they were supposed to do, but that doesn't necessarily translate into the real world. That's that piece, that last piece that we simply don't have at this point, Anna. And candidly, the officials who I'm speaking to here say that it's because it doesn't exist yet. That information just is not clear, even to the intelligence community at this point.
I'm curious how you see things right now, Mark, in terms of just sort of the debate, even within the administration, because I say that it's within the administration. It was the Defense Department's own agency and Intel that was part of that initial assessment, saying the nuclear program may have been set back only 3 to 6 months. And then you have the defense secretary saying, no, it was obliterated. It was completely destroyed. I mean, there's that debate happening internally. And so what do you see as far as what's going on here, and who should Americans trust? What kind of intelligence can we trust right now?
Well, I think, Anna, this is a spectacular own goal by the administration. And so when a policymaker, in this case, the President of the United States, comes out with a definitive statement, in essence, his own analytic statement, that's going to then throw the entire system into chaos because, as has been noted, bomb damage assessment takes a lot of time. It's the receipt of signals intelligence. That's intercepts of Iranian leadership communications, military communications, intelligence, the scientific establishment. It's human sources on the ground who sometimes can't be met right away. perhaps they do have eyes on the facility. And of course, there's other, as the chairman mentioned today, technical means, whether from imagery or other such satellites that would help us understand things. But this is a dynamic process and it takes a lot of time. But now you have the case in which 50% of the, half the American people, whatever CIA Director Ratcliffe says or DNI Tulsi Gabbard says, they're not going to believe it because they're just going to think that they're falling in line with the president. And it's too bad because ultimately I think this was a strike in which there certainly were pretty significant effects that were carried out. And I think you can say this was a success in many ways, but it's just going to be questioned by so many. And again, I think it's just an own goal. And for the people of the intelligence community, by the way, this is a nightmare scenario because you need to have that independent means or the independent ability to conduct analysis. And I think that's gone now.
Monica, with Gabbard apparently sidelined again, she's not going to be part of the briefings today or tomorrow, is our understanding. Does the president have any top aides around him who do give him information that may diverge from his preferred narrative?
I think so, Anna. And this is a president who takes in a lot of different information before he makes decisions. But we got a little bit of insight into this specifically from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, who said that he wasn't susceptible to any kind of outside influence in how he gives information to the president when he does. Listen.
My job as the chairman is to offer a range of options to the president. I've never been pressured by the president or the secretary to do anything other than tell him exactly what I'm thinking, and that's exactly what I've done.
And we know from our reporting that there are several generals who are often giving him that kind of information when he is briefed or getting his intelligence briefing. And then you mentioned specifically the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Anna, I'm told that even though, yes, they obviously have very differing opinions, she was in the key meetings leading up to the decision to authorize the strikes over the nuclear sites in Iran. But it is notable to point out that she won't be part of that list of briefers since many others in the administration are going to be speaking with lawmakers today.